The morning sun cast long shadows across the corridors of Kensington Palace as Prince William made his way through the familiar halls. His footsteps echoed softly against the polished floors, a sound that had become as routine as breathing over the years. Yet today felt different somehow, weighted with an unspoken tension that seemed to hang in the air like morning mist. Kate had been unusually quiet during breakfast, her usual bright chatter replaced by thoughtful silence. She had stirred her tea absently, her gaze fixed on something beyond the window that William couldn't quite identify. When he had asked if everything was all right, she had simply smiled that gentle smile he knew so well and assured him she was fine. But William had learned to read the subtle signs over their years together. The way her shoulders held just a fraction more tension, the slight downturn at the corners of her mouth when she thought no one was looking. The children had sensed something too, though they couldn't quite name what it was. George had been more subdued than usual during their morning routine, while Charlotte had clung a little tighter to her mother during their goodbye hug. Louis, still young enough to be blissfully unaware of adult complexities, had bounded off to his activities with his usual enthusiasm, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than it should have. As William walked toward his private study, he found himself thinking about the conversation they had shared the night before. Kate had mentioned feeling overwhelmed lately, though she hadn't elaborated on the specifics. The constant scrutiny, the endless schedule of royal duties, the weight of public expectations. It all took its toll, even on someone as naturally graceful and composed as his wife. He had wanted to press further, to understand exactly what was troubling her, but something in her demeanor had suggested she needed space to process her thoughts. The palace staff moved about their duties with their usual efficiency, but William noticed the way they glanced at him with slightly more attention than usual. Perhaps they too had sensed the shift in atmosphere, the subtle change that seemed to permeate even the grandest of royal residences when its inhabitants were dealing with personal struggles. Mrs. Henderson, their longtime housekeeper, had given him a particularly knowing look over the breakfast table, her eyes conveying the kind of understanding that came from years of caring for the family. William paused outside his study door, his hand resting on the ornate handle. Inside waited a day filled with meetings, correspondence, and the endless administrative tasks that came with his position. But his mind kept drifting to Kate, to the way she had looked out the window that morning as if searching for answers in the distance. He thought about their early days together, when life had seemed simpler, when the weight of royal responsibility had felt lighter on their young shoulders. The memory of their wedding day flashed through his mind. Kate's radiant smile as she walked down the aisle of Westminster Abbey, the way her hand had felt in his as they exchanged vows, the promise they had made to support each other through whatever challenges lay ahead. They had been so young then, so optimistic about their ability to navigate the complexities of royal life while maintaining their authentic selves and protecting their relationship. Over the years, they had faced numerous challenges together: the intense media scrutiny during their courtship, the adjustment to married life in the public eye, the joys and pressures of parenthood while serving the crown. Through it all, Kate had shown remarkable strength and grace, adapting to her role with a natural elegance that had won over both the public and the royal family. But William knew that beneath that composed exterior lay a woman who sometimes struggled with the sacrifices required of her position. He remembered the early days of their marriage, when Kate would sometimes retreat to their private quarters after a particularly challenging public engagement. Needing time to decompress and reconnect with herself, she had developed coping mechanisms over the years, ways to maintain her equilibrium in the face of constant public attention. But lately, something had shifted, and William could sense that she was grappling with feelings she hadn't yet found the words to express. The thought of his wife struggling alone troubled him deeply. Their partnership had always been built on open communication and mutual support, but he recognized that even in the closest relationships, there were times when one person needed space to work through their emotions before they could share them. Kate had always been someone who processed things internally before bringing them to him, and he had learned to respect that aspect of her personality, while still making it clear that he was there whenever she was ready to talk. As he finally turned the handle and entered his study, William made a mental note to check on Kate later in the morning. Perhaps after his first few meetings, he would find a quiet moment to sit with her, to create the kind of safe space where she might feel comfortable opening up about whatever was weighing on her heart. Kate stood by the tall windows of their private sitting room, watching the gardeners tend to the rose bushes below. The familiar routine of palace life continued around her, but she felt strangely disconnected from it all, as if she were watching her life unfold from a distance. The morning light filtered through the glass, casting gentle patterns on the Persian carpet beneath her feet. Yet even the beauty of the moment couldn't lift the heaviness that had settled over her spirit. She had been trying to identify exactly when this feeling had begun to take hold. Perhaps it was during the charity gala last week, when she had smiled and made conversation with hundreds of guests while feeling increasingly hollow inside. Or maybe it had started earlier, during the children's school event where she had watched other mothers chat casually about everyday concerns, while she remained carefully guarded, always aware that her words might be scrutinized and reported. The weight of constant performance had been building gradually, so subtly that she hadn't recognized it at first. Every public appearance required careful consideration of her clothing choices, her expressions, her responses to questions. Every interaction was potentially significant, every gesture analyzed and interpreted by media outlets around the world. While she had grown accustomed to this level of scrutiny over the years, lately it felt more suffocating than usual. Her thoughts drifted to a conversation she had overheard between two staff members the previous day. They had been discussing her upcoming schedule, noting how packed the next few weeks would be with various commitments and appearances. The way they spoke about her time, parceling it out in carefully measured segments, had made her feel like an object being moved from place to place rather than a person with her own needs and desires. Kate turned away from the window and moved to the comfortable armchair where she often sat to review her correspondence. The morning's letters lay unopened on the side table. Requests for patronages, invitations to events, briefing documents about upcoming engagements. Each envelope represented another demand on her time, another expectation to meet, another role to play. The thought of opening them filled her with a weariness that seemed to seep into her bones. She thought about her life before marriage, when her time had been her own to manage. The freedom to make spontaneous decisions, to change plans without consulting multiple staff members, to have private conversations without worrying about protocol or public perception. Those days felt like a lifetime ago, yet the memories remained vivid enough to highlight the contrast with her current reality. The children's voices drifted up from the garden below, and Kate moved back to the window to watch them play. George was attempting to teach Charlotte a new game, while Louis toddled around them, trying to insert himself into their activities. The sight of her children playing freely, without the weight of public expectation on their small shoulders, brought both joy and a sharp pang of protectiveness. She knew that as they grew older, they too would face the challenges that came with their royal heritage. Her phone buzzed with a message from her private secretary, confirming details for an appearance later in the week. The efficiency with which her life was managed sometimes felt overwhelming. Every minute accounted for, every movement coordinated with security and protocol teams. While she appreciated the dedication of her staff, there were moments when she longed for the simple act of making her own decisions about how to spend her day. Kate reflected on her role as a mother within the constraints of royal life. She wanted to be present for her children in the way her own mother had been for her, but the demands of public duty often pulled her in different directions. The careful balance between protecting their privacy and fulfilling her responsibilities as a working member of the royal family required constant navigation. Sometimes she worried that in trying to serve everyone else's expectations, she was losing touch with her authentic self as a mother and wife. The sound of William's voice in the corridor brought her back to the present moment. She could hear him speaking with his private secretary, discussing the morning's agenda. His voice carried the same warmth and authority it always had, and she found herself grateful for his steady presence in her life. Yet even with William's unwavering support, there were feelings and thoughts that felt too complex to articulate, struggles that seemed too personal to burden him with, given his own heavy responsibilities. She settled into her chair and picked up the first letter from the stack, forcing herself to focus on the task at hand. A children's hospital was requesting her patronage, describing the important work they did and how her involvement could help raise awareness and funds. The cause was worthy, the need genuine, and she knew that her participation could make a real difference. Yet even as she read about the positive impact she could have, She couldn't shake the feeling that she was slowly disappearing beneath the weight of everyone else's needs and expectations. The morning stretched ahead with its planned activities and responsibilities. Kate knew she would fulfill each commitment with her usual grace and dedication, presenting the composed public face that had become second nature to her. But in the quiet moments between obligations, the questions would return. Who was she becoming? And was there room in this carefully orchestrated life for the woman she had always been? The afternoon sun had shifted, casting new shadows across the palace grounds as William concluded his third meeting of the day. His mind, however, kept wandering to thoughts of Kate and the subtle changes he had observed in her demeanor over the past few weeks. Between discussions of international relations and domestic policy matters, he found himself analyzing moments from their recent interactions, searching for clues about what might be troubling his wife. During lunch, which they had taken separately, due to conflicting schedules, William had received a brief text from Kate mentioning that she was spending time in the garden with the children. The message had been cheerful enough, complete with a photo of Louis chasing butterflies, but something about its carefully upbeat tone had struck him as slightly forced. He recognized this pattern from their early years of marriage, when Kate would sometimes mask her concerns behind an extra layer of brightness, not wanting to add to his already considerable burdens. His private secretary knocked softly on the study door, reminding him of his next appointment. As William gathered his papers, he made a decision that surprised even himself. He instructed his staff to reschedule the remaining meetings of the year, explaining that he had urgent family matters to attend to. The look of mild confusion on his secretary's face reminded him of how rarely he made such requests. But William felt an overwhelming need to prioritize his wife's well-being over the endless stream of official duties. Walking through the palace corridors toward their private quarters, William reflected on the unique challenges that Kate faced as someone who had married into the royal family, rather than being born into it. While he had grown up understanding the expectations and limitations that came with his position, Kate had to learn and adapt to an entirely different way of living. The transformation had been remarkable to witness, but he sometimes wondered what it had cost her personally. He thought about their dating years, when Kate had been able to maintain some semblance of a normal life despite the media attention. She had worked at her family's business, spent time with friends, made spontaneous plans. The gradual erosion of those freedoms had been necessary but not without consequences. William knew that Kate rarely spoke about what she had given up, viewing such complaints as ungrateful given the privileges that came with her position. But he also knew that acknowledgement didn't make the losses any less real. The sound of children's laughter drew him toward the family's private sitting room. Through the partially open door, he could see Kate sitting on the floor with their youngest, helping him build a tower with colorful blocks. Her face showed genuine joy as she interacted with Louis, but William noticed the way her shoulders sagged slightly when she thought the children weren't looking. It was a small detail, but one that spoke volumes to someone who knew her as intimately as he did. Charlotte noticed him first, running to greet him with her characteristic enthusiasm. Her chatter about the day's activities filled the room with happy noise, but William's attention remained focused on Kate. She looked up at him with a smile that reached her eyes when she saw him, yet he could detect the fatigue beneath it. There was something in her expression that reminded him of how she had looked during the most challenging periods of media scrutiny in their early relationship, a guarded quality that suggested she was protecting herself from further emotional exposure. After spending some time playing with the children and hearing about their various adventures, William suggested that he and Kate take a walk in their private garden. The children were content to continue their games under the watchful eye of their nanny, and Kate agreed to the walk with what seemed like genuine enthusiasm. As they stepped outside into the gentle afternoon air, William felt hopeful that they might finally have the conversation that had been building between them. The garden provided a sanctuary from the formal atmosphere of the palace, a place where they could speak freely without the awareness of staff or official duties intruding on their thoughts. They walked in comfortable silence initially, each lost in their own reflections. Kate paused by a bench overlooking a small pond, watching the koi fish swim in lazy circles beneath the surface. There was something contemplative about her posture that encouraged William to wait rather than rushing into conversation. When Kate finally spoke, her voice was softer than usual, tinged with an uncertainty that she rarely allowed others to witness. She mentioned feeling as though she was losing track of who she was beneath all the roles she was expected to play. The words seemed to cost her something to speak, and William could see her hands trembling slightly as she voiced concerns that had clearly been weighing on her for some time. Her confession opened a floodgate of emotions that she had been carefully managing for weeks. She talked about the constant pressure to be perfect, the way every aspect of her appearance and behavior was analyzed and critiqued by the media and public. She expressed worry about the impact of this scrutiny on their children and frustration with the limitations it placed on her ability to be the kind of mother she wanted to be. Most painfully, she admitted to feeling like she was disappearing as an individual, becoming more of a symbol than a person. William listened without interruption, recognizing that Kate needed to express these feelings without judgment or immediate solutions. He could see the relief in her face as she finally gave voice to thoughts that had been circling in her mind, creating an internal pressure that had been building for far too long. William reached for Kate's hand as they sat together on the garden bench, feeling the slight tremor in her fingers as she continued to share the thoughts that had been weighing on her heart. Her honesty was both heartbreaking and brave, and he found himself struggling with his own emotions as he listened to the woman he loved describe feelings of isolation and loss that she had been carrying alone. The afternoon light was beginning to soften, casting a golden glow over the garden as Kate continued to open up about her experiences. She talked about moments during public engagements when she felt like an actress playing a role rather than being herself. The constant awareness of cameras and public scrutiny had created a layer of self-consciousness that sometimes felt impenetrable, even in moments that should have been joyful and meaningful. William felt a deep sense of guilt as he realized how many of these struggles Kate had been navigating without his full awareness. His own familiarity with royal life had perhaps made him less sensitive to the unique challenges she faced as someone adjusting to this world. He began to understand that what felt natural and manageable to him represented a fundamental shift in identity for her, one that required constant emotional energy to maintain. Kate spoke about missing the simple pleasure of spontaneous conversations with strangers, the kind of natural interactions that had once been part of her daily life. Every public exchange now required careful consideration of protocol and potential consequences. She described feeling trapped behind invisible barriers that prevented genuine connection with the people she met, even when she genuinely wanted to engage with them on a human level. The impact on their family life was another source of concern for Kate. She worried about the children, growing up in an environment where privacy was a luxury and normalcy was carefully orchestrated by staff. While she appreciated the dedication of their team, she sometimes felt like their family life was being managed rather than lived. Simple family activities required security assessments and media considerations that complicated even the most basic experiences. William listened as Kate described her frustration with the loss of anonymity, not for herself but for their children. She wanted them to experience childhood with as much freedom as possible, but the realities of their position made this increasingly challenging. Every school event, every play date, every family outing had to be carefully planned and coordinated. She felt guilty about the limitations this placed on her children's experiences and worried about the long-term effects on their development. As Kate continued to share her feelings, William began to see their life through her perspective in a way that was both illuminating and painful. He realized that while he had grown up gradually accepting the constraints of royal life, Kate had experienced them as a series of losses that accumulated over time. The freedoms she had taken for granted in her previous life had been replaced by responsibilities and expectations that, while meaningful, came at a significant personal cost. Kate's voice grew quieter as she admitted to sometimes feeling resentful about aspects of their life that she knew she should appreciate. The guilt associated with these feelings only added to her emotional burden, creating a cycle of self-criticism that was difficult to break. She felt ungrateful for questioning a life that millions of people admired from afar, yet she couldn't deny the reality of her own experience. The conversation revealed the depth of Kate's internal struggle between her love for William and their family and her need to maintain some sense of her authentic self. She had thrown herself into her royal duties with dedication and grace, But the constant performance required to fulfill these roles was exhausting in ways she hadn't anticipated. Every public appearance demanded not just her time and energy, but also a careful management of her emotions and reactions. William found himself reflecting on their courtship and early marriage, remembering Kate's natural warmth and spontaneity. He could see now how the requirements of royal life had gradually constrained these qualities, not eliminating them, but requiring them to be channeled through formal structures and protocols. The realization that his wife had been slowly adapting herself to fit their circumstances, often at personal cost, filled him with both admiration and sorrow. As the sun continued to set, casting longer shadows across the garden, Kate's tears began to flow more freely. The relief of finally expressing these long-held feelings was evident, but so was the pain of acknowledging how much her life had changed. William wrapped his arm around her shoulders, providing silent comfort as she processed emotions that had been building for months. The garden around them felt like a sanctuary, a place where they could be honest about the challenges of their extraordinary life, without judgment or the pressure to maintain appearances. In this moment of vulnerability, William saw not the composed public figure that Kate had become, but the woman he had fallen in love with, someone who was struggling to balance her personal needs with the demands of duty and service. The evening had settled around them like a gentle embrace as William and Kate remained in their private garden. The weight of unspoken truths finally lifted between them. William felt a profound shift in his understanding of their relationship, and the sacrifices Kate had been making, often silently, to support not just him but the institution they both served. Her tears had stopped, replaced by a quiet exhaustion that spoke to the emotional energy she had expended in sharing her deepest concerns. William began to speak, his words carefully chosen as he tried to articulate his own feelings about what Kate had revealed. He acknowledged that he had perhaps taken for granted her adaptation to royal life, assuming that her natural grace and competence meant the transition had been easier than it actually was. He admitted to feeling ashamed that she had been carrying these burdens alone, particularly when their marriage was supposed to be a partnership where both challenges and joys were shared. He shared his own struggles with the expectations of his position, helping Kate understand that even someone born into this life sometimes felt overwhelmed by its demands. While his experiences were different from hers, he could relate to the feeling of being more symbol than person, of having his identity shaped by external expectations rather than personal choice. This mutual understanding created a bridge between their different perspectives, helping Kate feel less isolated in her struggles. William talked about his admiration for how Kate had embraced her role while maintaining her essential kindness and authenticity. He had witnessed her genuine care for the causes she supported and the people she met, even when the formal structure of their engagements made natural connection challenging. Her ability to find moments of real human connection within the constraints of royal protocol was something he had always found remarkable, though he now understood the emotional cost it sometimes required. As they talked, William began to formulate ideas about how they might address some of Kate's concerns. He suggested they could work with their staff to build in more flexibility to their schedules, creating space for the kind of spontaneous family time that felt increasingly rare. He also proposed that they could be more intentional about protecting certain aspects of their private life, drawing clearer boundaries between their public duties and personal time. Kate listened with growing hope as William outlined potential changes to their approach. The idea of having more control over their family's daily rhythm appealed to her deeply, as did the possibility of creating more authentic moments within their public engagements. She had always been willing to fulfill her duties, but the prospect of doing so in a way that felt more aligned with her values and personality was energizing. They discussed the children's needs and how to better protect their sense of normalcy while preparing them for their eventual roles. Both parents shared concerns about raising children who would grow up with privilege and responsibility, wanting to ensure their children developed empathy, resilience, and a strong sense of their own identity beyond their royal heritage. This shared commitment to their children's well-being provided another area where they could work together to create positive change. William suggested they could also explore ways for Kate to pursue interests and causes that felt personally meaningful to her, even if they fell outside traditional royal activities. He recognized that her fulfillment as an individual would ultimately benefit their family and her public role. and he wanted to support her in finding avenues for personal growth and expression within the framework of their responsibilities. The conversation turned to their relationship and how they could better support each other through the ongoing challenges of their unique circumstances. William committed to being more attuned to Kate's emotional needs and creating regular opportunities for them to check in with each other about how they were managing the pressures of their position. They both acknowledged that their marriage required intentional nurturing to thrive within the constraints of royal life. Kate expressed gratitude for William's willingness to listen and his openness to making changes that could improve their quality of life. She felt heard and understood in a way that had been missing for some time, and this validation of her experiences was deeply healing. The knowledge that she didn't have to navigate these challenges alone brought a sense of relief that she could feel in her entire body. As darkness settled over the garden and they prepared to return inside, both William and Kate felt a renewed sense of connection and purpose. The honest conversation had not solved all their challenges, but it had created a foundation for addressing them together. Kate's tears had revealed not just her struggles, but also her strength and her deep commitment to their family and shared mission. They walked back toward the palace hand in hand, their steps lighter than they had been in weeks. The building, that had sometimes felt like a beautiful prison, now seemed more like a home again, a place where they could build a life that honored both their public responsibilities and their private needs. The road ahead would still have its challenges, but they would face them as partners, with a deeper understanding of what each brought to their shared journey. The weeks following their garden conversation brought subtle but meaningful changes to the rhythm of life at Kensington Palace. William had kept his promise to work with their staff on creating more flexibility in their schedules, and Kate could feel the difference in small but significant ways. Mornings felt less rushed, family dinners became more frequent, and there were pockets of time that belonged entirely to them without the intrusion of official duties or protocol considerations. Kate found herself approaching her public engagements with renewed energy and purpose. The knowledge that William truly understood her struggles and was actively working to support her well-being had lifted a weight she hadn't fully realized she had been carrying. She began to feel more like herself during official appearances, able to access the natural warmth and curiosity that had sometimes felt buried beneath layers of formal expectations. The changes weren't dramatic enough to be noticed by the media or public, but they were transformative for the family's daily experience. William had arranged for more activities to take place at their private residence, rather than constantly traveling to external venues. This simple adjustment gave the children more stability and allowed Kate to feel more grounded in her home environment. The palace, which had sometimes felt like a stage where she performed her role, began to feel more like a sanctuary where she could be herself. During a particularly successful charity event focused on children's mental health, Kate experienced a moment that crystallized the positive shift in her perspective. She was speaking with a young mother who had benefited from one of the programs Kate supported, and their conversation flowed naturally without the self-consciousness that had been plaguing her recent interactions. The mother's gratitude was genuine and personal, reminding Kate of the real impact her work could have when she allowed herself to connect authentically with the people she met. William noticed the change in Kate's demeanor during public appearances, observing how she seemed more present and engaged with the people they met. Her smiles appeared more natural, her conversations more fluid, and her overall energy more positive. The transformation wasn't complete, but it represented significant progress in her journey to reconcile her personal identity with her public role. He felt proud of her resilience and grateful that their honest conversation had opened the door to healing. The children, too, seemed to benefit from the more relaxed atmosphere in their home. With their parents less stressed and more present during family time, George, Charlotte, and Louis were able to enjoy a sense of normalcy that had been elusive during the more difficult period. Family game nights became a regular tradition, and spontaneous outings to their private garden or impromptu picnics on the palace grounds created the kind of simple, joyful memories that Kate had been craving. Kate began to explore some of the interests William had encouraged her to pursue. She started taking photography lessons from a discreet instructor who came to the palace, finding in the creative process an outlet for self-expression that felt entirely her own. The act of seeing the world through a camera lens helped her notice beauty and meaning in moments that might otherwise have been overshadowed by the demands of her schedule. These photographs, kept private for her own enjoyment, became a record of her family's life that felt authentic and unfiltered. The relationship between William and Kate deepened as they maintained the practice of regular, honest conversations about their experiences and feelings. They established weekly walks in their garden as protected time for checking in with each other, ensuring that small concerns didn't accumulate into larger problems as they had before. These conversations became a cornerstone of their marriage, providing both emotional intimacy and practical problem-solving for the ongoing challenges of their unique lifestyle. Kate also began to find ways to infuse her public duties with more personal meaning. She worked with her staff to seek out engagement opportunities that aligned with her genuine interests and values, rather than simply fulfilling obligations because they were expected. This shift allowed her to bring more passion and authenticity to her work, which in turn made the emotional labor of public appearances feel more sustainable and rewarding. One evening, as Kate was reviewing photographs from a recent family outing, she realized that the heavy feeling that had been her constant companion for months had lifted. She still faced the same external pressures and expectations, but her internal relationship to these challenges had fundamentally changed. The support and understanding she felt from William, combined with the practical changes they had implemented, had created space for her to breathe and remember who she was beneath all the roles she played. William found Kate in their sitting room that evening, surrounded by photo prints and looking more peaceful than he had seen her in a long time. The sight filled him with relief and happiness, confirming that their efforts to address her struggles had been worthwhile. As she showed him some of her favorite photographs, he could see the joy and creativity that had always been part of her personality beginning to emerge more freely again. Their journey wasn't over, and they both understood that maintaining this healthier balance would require ongoing attention and effort. But the crisis that had brought Kate to tears in their garden had also brought them closer together and led to positive changes that benefited their entire family. The door that William had unlocked with his willingness to truly listen had opened not just to Kate's pain, but also to possibilities for healing and growth that they were only beginning to explore. 6 months had passed since that transformative afternoon in the garden, and the changes in Kate's life had become woven into the fabric of their family's daily existence. What had begun as crisis management had evolved into a sustainable way of living that honored both their public responsibilities and private needs. Kate woke each morning with a sense of purpose that felt genuine rather than imposed, and the dread that had once accompanied thoughts of upcoming engagements had been replaced by anticipation for the meaningful connections she might make. The most visible change was in Kate's public appearances, though the shift was subtle enough that only those who knew her well could identify what was different. Her interactions with people felt more natural and spontaneous, her responses to questions more thoughtful and personal. The careful scripting that had once characterized her public statements had given way to a more authentic voice that reflected her genuine thoughts and feelings about the causes she supported. During a recent visit to a children's hospital, Kate had spent far longer than scheduled with individual families, engaging in conversations that went beyond polite formalities. Her staff had learned to build extra time into such engagements, recognizing that these authentic connections were not just personally fulfilling for Kate, but also more impactful for the people she met. The ripple effects of her renewed energy and engagement extended far beyond her immediate circle. The photography hobby that Kate had initially pursued as a private creative outlet had begun to inform her public work as well. She started documenting her official engagements through her own lens, creating a visual record that captured moments of genuine human connection rather than formal poses. Some of these photographs were eventually shared with the public, offering a more intimate and personal perspective on royal work that resonated strongly with audiences. William watched these developments with deep satisfaction, recognizing that the woman he had fallen in love with had not been lost, but simply needed the right conditions to flourish again. Their regular garden walks had become a cherished ritual that both looked forward to, a time when they could speak openly about their experiences without the filters required in their public roles. These conversations had strengthened their marriage in ways that went far beyond addressing the immediate crisis that had brought them together. The children had grown more confident and secure as their home environment became more stable and nurturing. George had begun to show interest in some of the causes his parents supported, asking thoughtful questions about social issues and expressing desire to help others. Charlotte had developed a keen interest in her mother's photography, often accompanying Kate on walks around the palace grounds to capture interesting images. Louis, still young enough to be largely unaware of the complexities of their position, simply enjoyed having parents who were more present and relaxed during family time. Kate's relationship with the palace staff had also evolved in positive ways. As she became more comfortable asserting her needs and preferences, the working relationships became more collaborative and less hierarchical. Staff members appreciated working with someone who was engaged and decisive, rather than struggling with internal conflicts about her role. The improved atmosphere benefited everyone involved in supporting the family's public and private life. One particularly meaningful development was Kate's decision to become more involved in the strategic planning of her patronages and public work. Rather than simply accepting assignments, she began to actively seek out opportunities that aligned with her passions and expertise. This shift not only made her work more personally fulfilling but also more effective, as her genuine enthusiasm and knowledge enhanced every engagement she undertook. The media and public had noticed the renewed vitality in Kate's public appearances, though they attributed it to various external factors rather than understanding the internal transformation that had taken place. Comments about her looking more radiant and engaged became common, and public approval ratings for her work increased significantly. While external validation had never been Kate's primary motivation, the positive response was gratifying and reinforced the value of the changes they had made. As Kate reflected on her journey from crisis to renewal, she felt profound gratitude for the support that had made her transformation possible. William's willingness to truly listen and take action had been crucial, but she also recognized her own courage in voicing her struggles and her commitment to finding solutions, rather than simply enduring difficulties. The experience had taught her valuable lessons about the importance of honest communication and the possibility of creating positive change even within seemingly rigid circumstances. The future still held challenges, and Kate understood that maintaining her sense of balance and authenticity would require ongoing attention and effort. But she faced these prospects with confidence, knowing that she had developed both the self-awareness and support systems necessary to navigate difficulties without losing herself in the process. The tears that had once represented despair and isolation had given way to a deeper understanding of her own strength and the power of honest connection.